Welcome everyone to the Blue Economy CRC's fourth webinar series for 2022. I am Professor Irene Pennises, the Research Director of the Blue Economy CRC. Good afternoon to those who are joining from Australia, and good morning to those that are joining from Belgium and further afar. I'd like to just start with beginning an acknowledgement to country, which is something that we do here in Australia, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connection to the land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and extend that respect to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I want to just provide a little bit of a background about who we are. We're the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre. We were established with a 10-year life under the Australian Government's Cooperative Research Centre program back in July 2019. So for those who are overseas, you may not be familiar with CRCs. CRCs are established to help improve the competitiveness, the productivity and the sustainability of Australian industries. We have about 43 partners from Australia and around the globe, including the Tasmanian Government, who's joining us today in this webinar. Ghent University and Demi Group, who are both from Belgium, are also partners in our CRC, and we've got great collaborations already established with Flanders Investment and Trade and some of our other Belgian partners that are joining us today. The purpose of the Blue Economy CRC is to perform world-class, collaborative, industry-focused research and training that underpins the growth of the blue economy through increased offshore sustainable aquaculture and renewable energy production. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tasmania, which is an island state in Australia, and Flanders, which is one of the 3 Dutch-speaking regions in Belgium, recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding, which is an MOU, to look at green hydrogen as part of their cooperation. The MOU provides a framework for the partnership and joint projects across green hydrogen value chain, covering a range of the sectors, both in industry and the research domain. This webinar sought to really bring together our stakeholders from Flanders and Tasmania to give an overview of why the MOU was agreed to and how green hydrogen can play an important role in the future. And look, really for us, there are a number of areas that the MOU could look at, but one of the potential areas is the use of green hydrogen in the marine shipping and offshore engineering applications. And that's sort of one of the main priority areas under the cooperation of the MOU. So Leslie, if I can just get you to go to the next slide, I just want to acknowledge the contributors to this webinar and start just by thanking, if I can please, of course, the Port of Antwerp, the Tasmanian Government, the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone, of course, Flanders Investment and Trade, the Blue Cluster, Tassports and Waterstock.net, and of course, the Blue Economy CRC. Thanks, Leslie. So as part of this MOU and as part of this webinar today and introducing the topic, we're really asking you if you can also complete a survey. We're seeking your input into how the cooperation between Flanders and Tasmania can best support your organisation in the areas of hydrogen research and development, pilot projects, and demonstrations in marine shipping and offshore energy sectors. We would like as many interested parties as we can really to complete the survey. And you'll find it if you go to our website where you found this event and you registered for this event. Further down below, there's this thing that asks you to complete the survey. And just to let you know that the collection of your details will be kept anonymous. Throughout the presentations today in this Zoom function, we'll be asking our presenters a lot of questions towards the end as part of the Q&A. To help encourage those questions, I'd really like you to post questions to the Q&A that's at the bottom of your screen. And if you can please reserve the chat function to specific questions to the panelists, just so that we can help coordinate the webinar. So rather than use the chat function, we just ask you to use the Q&A. And if you've got any technical issues, just pop them in the chat as well. I want to just introduce our speakers, if I can, please. So if you're happy to prepare to the next slide, please, Leslie. And just to tell you a little bit about the way in which this agenda has been put together. And then we'll go straight into the presentations. So the first part is I'd like to really just thank all of our speakers today. They've come together from different parts of the world to speak to us today about their expertise in this hydrogen economy. And we're going to start first with Shivali Solikovsky, who's the Manager of International Engagement and Export at Renewables, Climate and Future Industries Tasmania, also known as RECFIT, and they're part of the Tasmanian government. And she's going to introduce to us about the MOU, the purpose and its objectives. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move into presentations from Flanders. And just to give you some idea, we have three very important presenters that have joined us today. Mark Nudemans, who's the CEO of the Blue Cluster. The Blue Cluster is one of the maritime innovation hubs that's got about 200 members from companies, trade associations and knowledge institutes who are working in very similar areas to the Blue Economy CRC. So their presentation will be very interesting. Jill Decken, who's the Policy and Project Manager for Sustainable Energy at the Port of Antwerp, Burgess. And the Port of Antwerp in Belgium is really focusing on its energy transition and the climate impact on shipping. And thus they're making a real transition to a sustainable port as soon as possible. And I think here in Australia and in Tasmania, we really can learn from that. And I think we'll hear from Mark Cooper from Tassports about that as well. And then also we're going to hear from Tom Verliden, who's the project manager from Waterstofnet. Waterstofnet is a Dutch word for hydrogen net, and it's a platform and a network organisation that's focusing on the development of the hydrogen economy in Belgium and the Netherlands. And so they've got a lot of experience that they can bring towards the developments that are going to be happening here in Tasmania, which we'll also hear about from our Tasmanian speakers. So when we progress into the presentations from Tasmania, we're going to hear from four key people. Sean Terry, who's the Executive Director of RECFIT in the Tasmanian Government, and he's going to really cover the Tasmanian Government's policy on green hydrogen, and he's going to look at the role that RECFIT plays in establishing the green hydrogen industry in Tasmania. Neil Gross is with us today. He's the Bell Bay Hydrogen Cluster Manager, and he's part of the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone, BBAMZ. And he's going to talk to us about outlining some of the pathways from the development of the hydrogen policy to implementation of the Bell Bay Hydrogen Cluster. And he's going to talk to us a lot about some of the big major projects that have been developed in Tasmania and the importance of the cluster to help maximise the growth of that local supply chain, and really how important it is for industry to help influence the government policy and what actually that might look like here in Tasmania. We're going to go then over to Mark Cooper, who's the Manager of Operations at Bell Bay Port in Tassports. You know, Tasmania's ports have an ambition to transition its operations to net zero as well. And they're looking at their role in hydrogen and energy projects under development in Tasmania. And we're going to hear from Mark about that. And then lastly, we're going to hear from Professor Evan Gray. He's a program leader in the Blue Economy CRC in our program on offshore renewable energy systems. And he's going to talk to us about that program and some of the CRC's developments with our partners, which include our industry and our government partners here, including the Tasmanian government, around Tasmania's first small-scale commercial hydrogen microgrid that's going to be commissioned later this year. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone, and I look forward to the presentations and the Q&A that will follow. And so, Leslie, I think we can progress to inviting, if we can, our first speaker, and that is, of course, Shivali Solikovsky, who's the manager from RECFIT, who's going to talk to us about the MOU and its purpose and objectives. Thank you very much, Shivali.
Thanks, Irene, and thank you everyone for joining online this morning if you're on the other side of the world, and this evening if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. I'm just going to give you a really quick sort of overview around what the MOU is really about and what it's setting out to achieve. Might flick to the next slide if you can, please, Leslie. Thank you. So this really just sets the scene as to why we sort of move towards establishing an MOU with Flanders as a partner. We have our Green Hydrogen International Engagement and Export Strategy, which was recently released by the government, which sets the framework for how our partnerships and export readiness will be set out going forward for green hydrogen. Importantly, Partnerships facilitate investment, supply chains, and advanced research and development across the entire hydrogen supply chain. And this is something that is of significant interest for both Flanders and Tasmania. The Tasmanian and Flemish governments signed a Memorandum of Understanding in early February this year to support green hydrogen cooperation and development. And this represents the first kind of agreement that has been undertaken by both governments. So it's quite unique. Next slide, please, Leslie. Thank you. So the purpose of the MOU is broadly to promote and encourage practical collaboration between Tasmania and Flanders in relation to green hydrogen, and this is across the entire value chain. It sets out three key elements: research, innovation and development, hydrogen industry and business development, and also export and import opportunities. But importantly, the potential to cooperate on a whole range of other topics, as Irene outlined in her introduction, is fully encompassed within the framework of the MOU. So future cooperative projects beyond marine shipping and offshore applications can include things around mobility and storage applications, refuelling infrastructure, storage solutions, alternative fuels and synthetic carriers for shipping, port marine infrastructure and logistics connectivity, and offshore energy systems. Next slide, please. This one was just about activating the MOU, and it's my last slide anyway. And some of this Irene has already covered in outlining what today is really about. Strengthening research connections and knowledge exchange is the cornerstone of the MOU. Collaboration on green hydrogen in the marine and shipping sector has been identified as an initial priority. But other focus areas beyond this will, as I've already mentioned, include offshore hydrogen energy systems, port logistics and connectivity, alternative fuels, and mobility and storage applications. So we're very much looking forward to, along with our Flemish colleagues, a very productive webinar outlining opportunities to identify how capabilities and expertise from both sides can be matched to advance specific green hydrogen collaborative research projects going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chevelle, and I'm sorry we couldn't just show those last couple slides, but we certainly can make them available following the webinar. There seems to have been a little bit of a glitch. We're going to move now, if we can, into the presentations from Flanders. And I'm going to start with Mark Newman, who's the CEO of the Blue Cluster. Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and please feel free for us to run your presentation, for you to share your slides. So currently we can see it's not the correct slides. At the moment, we're looking at the speaker view. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
That should do the trick. Thank you. Sorry for the glitch, and we're off to start at breakneck speed. I was asked to set the scene, and I'm sure everyone in the audience can read faster than I can talk. And as Irene claims that she can talk very fast, I can assure you I'm a fast talker as well. Let's go. So the Blue Cluster is as Irene already said, is a gathering of triple helix organization, as they said. And one of the things we do is we also provide subsidies to companies who are into companies and research institutes who want to do innovation projects. We're active in many areas, 6 actually, going from blue tourism to coastal protection, renewable energy, of course, maritime connection. And we have already a few, well, we have several hydrogen projects running. I'm just going to show them to you on the screen, but every time involving several Flemish companies in connection with research institutes and of course with the government. And this one in particular about is about decarbonization of shipping and clean hydrogen as a propulsion. As the previous speaker said, we have a very international outreach. Okay, this is the MOU Flanders, Tasmania, and I see there's a typo on the screen. Blue economy should not be a mystery for people in the audience, but just to remind you, it's about sustainable economy linked to oceans and seas, not plain gas exploration or pumping up oil. And blue economy in Europe is pretty big and getting bigger all the time. So even in Flanders, where we live, which is a quite small region, but very rich, it's 5.2% of the Flemish GDP. And that means that it is at par with sectors like chemistry and life sciences and in food. And actually, when you look at employment and added value, it even is bigger than chemistry and life sciences and food. Now, Europe has big ambitions. They call it the Green Deal. And I often say about the Green Deal that the Green Deal is for Europe what Kennedy's program, we're going to put a man on the moon was. So it wants to accelerate the shift to sustainable and smart mobility, and it's all about the EU's leading role as a global leader for making the transition to a sustainable and carbon-free economy and society. And one of the things they use as a tool is what they call the Fit for 55. There's plenty, you can see the targets, you have a glimpse on them on the screen, but the main point is that they already want to reduce the net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, which is quite an ambitious goal, especially and timely, actually, if you see what the situation is at the moment with Russia and Ukraine on our borders. Now, one of the points I was asked to address before I hand over to the next speaker, who will seamlessly continue on what I've been talking about, it's about decarbonization of shipping. I am actually from the shipping industry myself. I spent 40 years in the shipping industry as a CEO of a stock-quoted shipping company. Shipping is the exponent of globalization and the facilitator of globalization, meaning whatever you also do, if you don't act promptly, the net total of emissions of the shipping industry will keep on rising rapidly. At the moment, maritime transport is already responsible for about 2.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, there's two ways people are trying to do it, or two instances. You have the International Maritime Organization, of which you see here their strategy forward on how they want to achieve going to zero greenhouse gas emissions. You can see, I mean, the IMO is a United Nations institute. See, as soon as possible in this century is quite a fluid, let's say, target, or quite a moving target. By 2050, they talk about at least
Just to let you know, Mark, we can't hear you at the moment. We've hit a glitch. Unfortunately, it looks like your headphones have cut out.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Can you hear me now?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yes,
okay,
we can.
Fine. I don't know what happened, but something seems to have gone wrong. So the IMO has some targets, but also Europe is moving as a union They want to include shipping in their emission trading system, which has rattled really the shipping industry, who is a traditional industry, who is not very keen on interference. But there is, of course, a lot of potential for hydrogen. As you know, Flanders is one of the pioneers of offshore wind. Actually, 1 windmill out of 3 in the world has been built by a Flemish company up till now. So the question is there a potential for hydrogen in decarbonizing shipping? So what about hydrogen? And you see here an example of Linde together with Det Norske Veritas, the Norwegians, were looking at the project. But there are quite some discussions, and this is maybe a nice as an illustration. And if you can see the presentation afterwards, you can have a look at it a little bit closer. But if you do a subjective comparison between, for instance, liquid hydrogen and LNG, the conclusion is that hydrogen as a direct fuel for ships is not really feasible, because the energy density of hydrogen is too small. You're gonna have to need too much hydrogen. I mean, you're going to lose a lot of cargo space. So for short sea shipping, however, compressed hydrogen or liquid hydrogen are viable options. So what seems to be the way forward, if you look at decarbonizing shipping, is transforming green hydrogen into other fuels like ammonia, methanol, or other e-fuels. And that means, and that is a point that is very, very to the in the news every day nowadays, is Europe remains dependent on the import of energy, and it's one of the main bases for our discussions also with Tasmania, not only to help each other out on a scientific basis, but also we will Europe will not be able to become energy independent. We will have to import hydrogen. And of course, to import hydrogen, you need ports and harbors. And I can seamlessly hand over my presentation to the next speaker, Tom Verlinde of the Port of Antwerp. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it. And apologies that we had a small problem with the vocals, but everything came through in the end. So thank you very much. I'm going to now ask Jill Decam, who's the Policy and Project Manager for Sustainable Energy at the Port of Antwerp, Bruges, to please share his slides and present to us as well. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentations.
Thank you, Irene, for the introduction. So I'm Gilles from Port of Antwerp, Bruges, and I'll give a little bit of an introduction into our energy vision and also how it plays an effect on the shipping industry. So since recently, we are one port with 2 locations. So we have fused with the Port of Zeebrugge, and therefore we have 2 locations, one in Antwerp, one in Bruges. And towards the energy transition, this plays an important role because we have a seaside location now and also a more inland location close to the chemical industry, but also to the industries in our neighboring countries. Today, we're already an energy port. We have a lot of throughput of natural gas and oil products with a lot of refinery capacity, chemical outputs, including a lot of tank storage facilities, pipelines, which makes us today the largest chemical hub in Europe and the 2nd largest chemical hub worldwide. However, this comes at the consequence that since it's based on fossil products, we also emit quite a lot of CO2 emissions. And as a port authority, we are determined to make a change in that and to be a home port as a lever for a sustainable future. And how do we want to realize that? Well, it's to focus on where do we get our energy from, and it has to shift from fossil products to more renewable products, and we want to be a front runner in this energy transition. And so, what's the situation today for Belgium, but in general for Northwest Europe? Well, to give a bit of an idea on this, we're in the dark spot of Europe, I would like to say. And it's not based on the left figure, but it's based on the right figure, which presents a study that shows us the potential for renewable energy locally. And you see Belgium it's situated here. The Netherlands, Germany, we're in dark red, which means that we have a very high energy demand because of the local industries that are present there, but we have no potential to meet that demand because there's no space, or wind and sun energy is not sufficient. So we have to do something to solve this. And to give you a few ideas of a bit of numbers on the Belgian situation. So today we're consuming about 500 terawatt hours. It's mainly fuel and mainly heat. So not electricity. Electricity is the smallest amount of our energy requirements. And so it's mainly based on natural gas and crude oil. Towards 2050, this needs to shift. It needs to be green. It probably will be lower, but nobody knows how low. And as I already said, local renewable electricity will play a part, but it will not be sufficient to meet all our needs. It will cover about 1/3, a half, perhaps, of our energy requirements. But in addition to that, we will need hydrogen. Green hydrogen being imported from locations in Europe with enough potential, such as the Scandinavian countries or the southern countries, but certainly also import by ship from overseas locations, such as the Middle East or, for example, Australia. And therefore, as a port authority, we have constructed this vision, this idea, this strategy towards our energy supply, because it's our greatest climate problem, and we will have to transition towards wind and sun as primary energy source. But it needs to be robust. It needs to be flexible, because our industry depends on reliable and affordable green energy supply. So we'll need to make sure that this is the case for our port, but for Belgium and for our surrounding countries as well. And therefore, we have our strategy formed around 3 pillars. So first of all, it's local renewable energy production. Even though we cannot meet the full demand, we need to accelerate the deployment of local renewable energy as fast as possible, and of course get also electrical infrastructure. But secondly, we need to work on the hydrogen economy, get hydrogen infrastructure by the means of pipelines into the ground in Europe, and work on the import of green hydrogen carriers through our Flemish seaports, Zeebrugge and Antwerp. And so as a port, we think we can play an important role there as an energy hub of the future, where we can provide infrastructure, for example, for CO2, infrastructure for hydrogen and hydrogen carriers by pipelines, by storage facilities, infrastructure for electrical equipment, get electrical cables from offshore wind parks into the ports to distribute them towards the end consumer and the population. But also, since we are a chemical hub today, we will have this industry still present and also convert the energy, the electrical energy or the molecular energy towards products that can be then be shipped, transported by rail, transported by pipeline towards other companies or towards the end consumer. So we really believe that ports can play in this flow of energy a very important role as a hub. And so today, to realize that, to kickstart that economy towards carbon neutrality in 2050, we have some focus domains with some concrete projects. And you see that we work on energy-related topics, on industry-related topics, on shipping-related topics. And I would like to highlight 2 of them. The first one is the Hydrogen Import Coalition. It's a coalition with 6 industrial players, which you can see on the bottom of the slide, that studied the entire value chain of hydrogen imports. So import from overseas locations where there's enough space, where the sun and wind potential is very high, such as Tasmania or Australia in general, and where then that electricity can be generated at a low cost. To get the electricity towards Europe, or to get the energy towards Europe, it has to be converted into hydrogen or as a hydrogen carrier, such as methanol, ammonia, or others, stored and shipped over the seas. When then arriving in the port of Antwerp, Bruges, it can be stored again and by pipelines be fed towards our end user. As an idea, we see that this hydrogen import-export chain is being developed today with a lot of collaborations that are being formed, and you see a few of them here on the slides. Of course, also the collaboration that we're talking about today between Flanders and Tasmania. And so then we get our energy here in Belgium or Northwest Europe. Then of course we can use it for shipping needs, because shipping is one of those industries that for its decarbonization is looking towards alternative fuels, not towards electricity, because to meet its operating range, electricity will not suffice and it will require alternative solutions. And so I come towards our second project that we're today working on is multi-fuel port, which will drive the uptake of alternative fueling options in shipping. And today we see a lot of options ranging from the fossil ones, such as diesel oil or very low sulfur fuel oil, that however have to be phased out. What the solution will be for the future, it's uncertain. Today we see a lot of LNG as a transitional fuel. Towards the future, we're thinking that it will go towards methanol, ammonia, hydrogen, but also other solutions, other e-fuels could pop up. We also see the importance of onshore power supply. If a ship is moored in a port, it can shut down its engine and run on electricity from the shore. However, we as a port authority, we feel that to make this possible, we need to focus on all the different kind of solutions and provide the necessary infrastructure, safety guidelines, operating procedures to bunker those fuels in the future. And that's why, as a port authority, we have different roles in general in our daily operations. But here in the multi-fuel port project, they all come together as well. As a regulator, we have to provide safety procedures, operational guidelines. As a landlord, we need to provide space for safe bunkering, which is why today we are studying a bunker map, and we're investigating every location to see where it can happen safely or where it cannot happen at all, because some of these products, ammonia for example, is toxic, hydrogen is very explosive, so yeah, there can be interference with other operations in the port, and so we need to study where possible bunker locations can happen. As an operator, we operate our own tugboats, and we're currently as well converting them to renewable fuels. So we have one tugboat on hydrogen, one tugboat on methanol. And as a community builder, we try to do this together with all the companies within the port, with all the fuel distributors, to really listen to their needs, to their ambitions, and help drive the uptake of these alternative fuels. And really, as a first milestone, we have 2025, where we want to have in place for the main fuels, methanol, ammonia, hydrogen, the first bunkering strategy and bunkering operations. So that was it from my side.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Jill. I'm going to now move to Tom. I'd like to introduce Tom Verdelin for the project manager from Waterstoffnet. So thank you, Tom.
Hello. Good morning or good afternoon, depending from where you're listening. So on the next slide, I will explain a little bit what Waterstoffnet is all about. And Waterstoffnet is a Dutch name. That's our company name. But if you translate it, Waterstoff is the same as hydrogen in English. So we are called HydrogenNet. And what do? We are a network and platform organization. in Flanders. Maybe you can click so that everything appears on the slide. So we started in 2009, and what we're doing is in fact four things. We act as a network organization. We have a network of around nowadays 130 companies, organizations, universities, where we bring them together, where we coordinate projects among them. As you see, the second pillar is doing projects with those members. We also act as a knowledge center for hydrogen in Belgium and the Netherlands. And we're also an advisor to the government. So everything which comes out of this cluster of all organizations, companies that want to be involved in the hydrogen economy, we also play a role towards as an advisor to the government. And we do this for Belgium and for the Netherlands. On the next slide, you see all the different, and I'm not going to, to list them. You have an overview here, and it's growing rapidly. Just to give you an impression, 2 years ago, we had 60 members. Now, 2 years later, we already have 130 members. Just to give you an impression that the hydrogen economy is really fast growing. All those organizations, they are not joining us just for fun. They're joining because they really want to be involved in the hydrogen economy, and they're looking for partnerships. So if you then go from 60 to 130 partners in 2 years' time, that means that there really is a need for networking, and that the hydrogen economy is growing very fast. On the next slide, you can also see that a little bit. These are all applications that have been performed and that has been tested during the last years. So you can see buses run on hydrogen. We have waste garbage trucks. We now have, I will show you later on again, a ferry that's running on hydrogen. We already have the first trucks running on hydrogen. I'm just going this just to give you an overview what already is in place. It's not on a huge scale, but this is all running already today. So, for example, Zero, this is a generator running on hydrogen. We also have in Belgium companies that are producing electrolyzers. Also fuel cells you see here. These are all real products, which I'm showing, from Cummins, from John Cockerill. But also, for example, for the electrolyzers, the membranes, Agfa is producing them in Belgium. Also hydrogen tanks, because you need to store it, of course, are produced here. And one of our universities is now working on a solar panel, which is producing hydrogen right away. So the solar panels you see there, they are not producing electricity. Of course, they are as an intermediate, but what's coming out of this solar panel is hydrogen in a liquid form. So you see, as an overview, that the first applications have started, let's say. And then on the next slide, you see what's the Belgian strategy. As Gilles already talked about, we will produce hydrogen ourselves, but a lot will be imported. And then what's the strategy to use this hydrogen for? You see, we will use it for the industry, for heavy transport, for electricity, and for buildings, but not all right away. We can't start because we don't have the volumes today. Those volumes, they will grow gradually. And then in Belgium, we said, okay, what's the first things we're going to use this hydrogen for? Because we can't use it for everything immediately. We will start with the industry, the needs for the industry. So the industry is already today using a lot of hydrogen. Hydrogen, for example, in our ports, the port of Antwerp is a very huge chemical platform also. The second biggest in the world, the biggest in Europe is sitting in Antwerp. And they use already hydrogen, but this today is gray hydrogen. It's starting from from gas, from natural gas. So it's not starting from water electrolysis. So all this gray hydrogen, in first instance, we want to convert to green hydrogen. That's the first step. And also in the first step is we are looking at heavy duty in transport, and I will come to that immediately after. The next step will be our electricity, and the last step will be in buildings. Then we're already, what we think, around 2050. So we can use hydrogen also for heating of buildings, but not today. The first things we want to do is the big uses we already have in industry, and industry is chemical industry and steel industry. Those are the two biggest ones. But then if you go on the next slide, you see what can we do on transport. And here you see the different types of transport. We're not going to use hydrogen or hydrogen carriers for everything. If you can use electricity right away, renewable electricity in cars, for example, so battery cars, battery electric cars, most of the cars will be driven by battery electric. But if you go to more heavy duty, a battery will not be sufficient anymore. The energy density of a battery is not sufficient. So then we go to pure hydrogen. And if you then even go to applications like planes and like sea freight, where you even, as Mark already said, even the energy density of hydrogen will be not enough, then we will probably switch to hydrogen carriers, such as ammonia, such as methanol. And now I really want to go into the, on the next slide, you see what we're already doing for sustainable shipping. So everything I'm showing you is not something we're dreaming of, it's something which is existing already. I give you 3 examples. So we have CMB has made a small ferry. So this Hydroville is a small ferry that is running on hydrogen today. It's on gaseous hydrogen. Gilles already explained that they are developing a hydrotech, a tugboat, also on hydrogen in the port. And the last one you see from Future Proof Shipping, that's a barge that will also run on hydrogen. So these are already existing ships that are running on hydrogen. And on the next slide, I want to give you a first shot. What you see here was inaugurated last week. So 1 week ago, exactly 1 week ago, this is today. Let's hope that we will say something different in the next years. But today, this is the largest vessel on hydrogen that is running, and this is inaugurated last week. This is a crew transfer vessel. So this is bringing crew members towards wind platforms, from coast to wind platforms. And this is now a real operation. This is also hydrogen on gaseous form, no liquids, but on gas. Maybe if I go a little bit on the next slides on the technology. So we can store hydrogen in different forms. We can do it physical-based or material-based. Physical-based is in gaseous form, but then it needs to be pressurized, because otherwise you have a large volume, way too large. So we pressurize it typically to 350 or 500 bar. You can also have it cryocompressed, or you can have it in liquids. But if you have it in liquids, then you need to cool it. Then the other ones on material-based. So then you're talking about methanol, ammonia, but also some things that are not so technically advanced at this moment. They're still at a low TRL, like for example LOHC. And then we're looking now on the next slide. You can see, on the next slide you see. So this is on storage. On the next slide you see what different technologies are we testing. It's both fuel cells and engines. So we're looking now for fuel cells that run on hydrogen, but also engines that run on hydrogen or on pure hydrogen. The first one is now has now been developed, which is running on pure hydrogen. Then you need an ignition engine for. but already we have in place dual fuel engines that run partly on diesel and partly on hydrogen. And on the next slide, you see what the Rhine project has been thinking of all those different technologies. How can we make a roadmap? What will we do as a first step? And the next slide, you see what has been chosen for. So yeah, you can click all the different ones and you will see the time schedule in one go. So in short term is what we are developing now. So the next 5 years, we're developing this hydrogen in gaseous form, and it will be with swappable containers. Later on, liquid hydrogen will become available, and even later on, all the ones like LOHCs, technologies that are still in development, but do have a lot of advantages compared to, for example, gaseous hydrogen. But as you can see, we are not waiting to have all the developments already ready. We start already from a gaseous form, then we will go to the liquid form, and we will probably end with LOHCs. And in the sea vessels, on the next slide, you see our latest development. I will immediately talk about sea vessels. This is my last slide. This is a project which will start for barges. So not for sea vessels, but for barges in the Flanders area, where we will start with swappable containers. So in these containers, hydrogen tanks are put at 350 bar. You can run those boats will sail. If the containers are empty, we just swap them at the quay with a full container, and they can run again. This one will be probably this project will be probably with fuel cells. So the fuel cells will be on board, of course, also on a container, but this will stay on board. And then we have swappable containers with hydrogen. On sea vessels, it's another thing, of course. There you can't swap your containers when you're at the ocean. So there we see the first developments with ammonia. So with internal combustion engines on ammonia and on methanol. So I think I just gave you a quick overview of things that have been developed already or are in development for sustainable shipping here in Flanders. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you very much to also Giles as well and Mark for your presentations from Flanders. I can see lots of very interesting questions arising for part of the Q&A, and I'm going to be looking forward to asking some of those questions to both Flanders and Tasmania. I'm going to now turn to the Tasmanian presentations and invite Sean Terry, who's the Executive Director of Renewables Climate Future Industries Tasmania, as part of the Tasmanian government, to talk to us about the Tasmanian government's perspective. And we'll ask Leslie if she can share for us, please, Sean's slides. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Irene. Would you like me to turn my video on as well? Or,
that's okay. That's up to you. You can keep it for the Q&A if you like.
Right. Okay. No problem. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this session, very kindly put on by the Blue Economy CRC. Can you just go to the next slide, the first slide, please, Leslie? Yes. Sorry, the next one. So just a little bit about renewables, climate and future industries Tasmania. So we're a relatively young organisation. In fact, we're only probably about 6 or 7 months old. The previous Premier saw a real opportunity for Tasmania to leverage off some of its renewable energy and climate change advantages or natural resources. So he decided to bring together the disparate parts of government around policy, our regulatory functions and our industry development functions to form RecFit. And there's a little bit more detail on that slide about some of our roles and responsibilities. But if you go to the next slide, please, Leslie. So we've got a big agenda under renewables and climate change in Tasmania, and a lot of these initiatives are actually embedded in legislation. Through my colleagues in the climate change area, they're progressing our climate change action plan with a view to maintaining Tasmania's net zero emissions by 2030. As part of that plan, they're also developing a number of sectoral emissions reduction and resilience plans. So it's a big thing for the Tasmanian government to partner with industry as we go through this transition. And some of the sectors we're working with include transport, tourism, agriculture, and energy. Energy, which I am directly responsible for, also has a large agenda, and there's the Tasmanian Renewable Energy Target, which I'll get to a little bit later. Also, our major strategy documents are the Tasmanian Renewable Energy Action Plan and our Tasmanian Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan. I'll also go into a little bit more detail about those later. Next slide, please. First of all, green hydrogen and why Tasmania. You can probably see in that graphic, you know, we're a small dot at the bottom of the world, but we like to think we bat out of our league and we can make a major contribution, not only to Australia's decarbonisation strategy, but also the global decarbonisation agenda. So we think we've got a few natural advantages although we're small. I often say we don't have economies of scale in Tasmania, but we do have economy of scope. One of our, well, you may say it's an advantage, is the state owns all its major utility providers. So our electricity network, our electricity generation, our ports, our water utilities are all under state control. So we can normally get all those people around the table working together collectively to deliver on industry development. But beyond that, we've also got a number of natural advantages. Tasmania is Australia's largest water manager, and we've also got some of the best wind resources, not only in Australia, but also globally. In fact, AEMO's AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, under their integrated system plan, identifies Tasmania's onshore wind capacity factors at between about 45 and 55%, and our offshore wind factors, predominantly in Bass Strait, will exceed 50%. We've also got some great water ports and industrial precincts, which are pretty much not quite. We still have to do some investment in infrastructure, but they're reasonably hydrogen ready. Next slide, please. Yep, as I mentioned, one of the government's key initiatives, which they probably announced 18 months to 2 years ago, was the Tasmanian Renewable Energy Action Plan. And that was underpinned by our aspirations to double our current existing 100% renewable electricity generation to 200% by 2040. That's a legislated target. We've also got an interim target of 150% by 2030, and that's not far away. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and 2030. But largely, this is an export play for Tasmania. This is about helping the rest of Australia on its pathway as part of its transition to a net zero emissions economy. Now, the Renewable Energy Action Plan was underpinned by 3 pillars: transforming Tasmania into a global renewable energy powerhouse, and that's off the back of a number of major renewable energy projects and renewable hydrogen. I'll go to number 3 next. So, of course, we want to see investment in local jobs and particularly in our regional communities. And number 2, I don't think we can lose sight of this. This is quite important. We want to make sure energy works for the Tasmanian community, and part of that is and this is more acute because of the recent experience with power prices increasing in Australia, and that may be happening globally as well. We want to make sure that we bring the whole community along with us as we make that transition. And particularly, we don't want a disproportionate part of our community wearing a lot of the cost for supporting the transition. So Tasmanian government's very conscious to protecting low income and vulnerable people as we move through move through this agenda. And if you want to see more about our action plan, it's available on our website. I won't go through all the actions under it. There's 25 of them, which we're busily implementing at the moment, but that's available from the RecFit website. Next slide, please. And our companion strategy is the Tasmanian Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan. So we see Tasmania as has a real opportunity to become a globally significant green hydrogen hub. This is about creating a new industry for Tasmania, but also helping. And interesting that the previous speakers mentioned how they'll need to import a lot of their green hydrogen. Well, we see Tasmania can play an important role, as a significant exporter of renewable hydrogen. So the government's right behind that, and they've announced a $50 million Tasmanian Renewable Hydrogen Industry Development Fund. Now we're using that to support local industry activation, but we're also helping a number of organisations further develop their feasibility studies around export scale hydrogen hubs in Tasmania. Next slide. And under our Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan, they're the targets the government has set itself, and by extension has set RecFit. So in the next 2 years, we want to have locally produced and locally used hydrogen in Tasmania, and we're well advanced in some of our plans around a hydrogen bus trial through our state-owned public transport provider. By 2025, by 2027, we want to commence the export of renewable hydrogen, and I'll go in a little bit more later about our hydrogen hub that we're progressing at Bell Bay. And then by 2030, we want to be a globally significant exporter of renewable hydrogen to the rest of the world. Next slide, please. Yeah, very quickly, because I know today's focusing a lot on hydrogen. We do have a number of other major renewable energy projects underway in Tasmania, which will be complementary to hydrogen. So Project Marinus is a 1,500 megawatt HVDC. Well, it's actually two 750 megawatt HVDC interconnectors between Tasmania and the mainland. It also includes some augmentation to our on-island transmission system. But what that's about unlocking Tasmania's renewable energy capacity to export to the rest of Australia, as the rest of Australia moves from its largely heavily reliant on thermal generation, centralised thermal generation, to diversified variable renewable energy generation. We see Tasmania through increased interconnection providing a much greater role in being able to provide firming energy and dispatchable energy into the national electricity market. And also that's supported by our Battery of the Nation renewable energy initiatives under the state-owned electricity generator Hydro Tasmania. We've already got latent capacity in Tasmania that we can't get off island at the moment. Increased interconnection will help support that, but it'll also help support more on-island renewable energy development, mainly in the form of wind, but potentially some grid scale solar also. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we've got a 200% renewable energy target, and we've got a short time to reach that. Now, we shouldn't underestimate some of the challenges involved. I think Tasmania's got something like between 180 to 200 wind turbines scattered around our state at the moment. To meet our target, we're going to have to increase that number up from somewhere to around 900 to 1,000 turbines. That's over and above our existing 200 turbines. Now, We're going to make sure we have to bring communities along with us. Even though Tasmania's got a great legacy in renewable energy development, it has been the flashpoint for some significant environmental issues in the past. So we've learned a lot from that, and we think it's important that we build out our renewable energy infrastructure in a way that's supported by the community and a sustainable basis. And that goes into developing renewable energy zones, which I won't spend too much time on at the moment, but hopefully we'll be announcing our first renewable energy zone by the end of 2022. Next slide, please. As I've already alluded to, we're looking to develop Bell Bay in the north of Tasmania as our first hydrogen hub, and hopefully Australia's first and only green hydrogen hub. The Commonwealth Government's recently announced $70 million to support the development of that hub, which will be matched by the state government, but it also requires some investment in new infrastructure around water infrastructure, the electricity network, ports, and also we'll have to bring on new energy supply. Yeah, but we're basically just about to start that process, and we'll be working with our industry partners, and we've got significant, oh sorry, next slide please. And we've already got significant interest from some major industrial players around developing Bell Bay as a hydrogen hub, and there's Origin, Able, Grange Resources, Woodside, Fortescue Future Industries. We're working very closely with those proponents about how we realise Bell Bay as an export scale hydrogen hub. And we're certainly working with some other potential proponents as well. So there's a lot of interest in developing Bell Bay, and now we're moving into the implementation phase. Next slide, please. But we want to make sure it's not all just about export for Tasmania. We want to look at opportunities in the domestic market where we can have some applications of hydrogen. As I mentioned, we're already progressing a bus demonstration trial with our state-owned public transport provider, Metro Tasmania. So we've gone to market to procure the buses and the necessary infrastructure to support that initiative. We're also looking at opportunities, particularly in the marine sector. It wouldn't be any surprise as an island. Tasmania's got quite a vibrant maritime sector, and we've also got an important aquaculture sector. So we see some opportunities to work with those particular industries as they try to decarbonise their industry and their businesses. Opportunities in rail and train, and once again, that's another state-owned entity, Tasrail, that we're looking to partner with to develop some low emissions technology as they replace their fleet of locomotives. And a few other initiatives. It's very important that we work with industry and local communities, and you'll see a few of them are named there, the Tasmanian Renewable Hydrogen Industry Network, which is very similar to the clusters that we heard from our previous speakers. So we're making sure that we develop the skills and capability in our local service providers as we support this industry. And next slide, please. Yeah, and a really exciting area is opportunities in Antarctica. It's fair to say Antarctica is probably one of the most pristine environments on the planet, but they do rely heavily on fossil fuels, not only to get there, but also to make sure they have secure power supply. So we're working with the Australian Antarctic Division on possible initiatives that we can help decarbonise that important sector. Next slide, please. Yeah, just very quickly. So we do have a small but not insignificant gas sector in Tasmania. So we're looking at opportunities and the role that gas provides as we move to decarbonise Tasmania's energy sector. So once again, we're working with industry and the network providers around what role gas and what that transition will look like over the next 20 to 30 years. I think one of the most important things, one of the probably more challenging areas, is how we work with those hard to abate industries such as smelters and other heavy industry. So we're hoping to release that towards the end of 2022, but that'll provide a roadmap for gas as part of that transition. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just a little bit on our international engagement strategy. I mentioned a number of times that we see green hydrogen as an important export sector we can develop in Tasmania. So we've already built some strong relationships, particularly with our northern European partners. We have MOUs with the Port of Rotterdam, Flanders, and we're currently working with Bremen for an MOU, and we've also started to escalate our engagement with the Asia Pacific region, particularly Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. But this is going to be a global transition, and we're looking forward to strengthening those relationships with our international partners, not only governments but also businesses and industry. I think that comes to the end of my presentation, Irene. I just wanted to kind of close one thing that wasn't in the slides, which I dare say is going to be a challenge for everyone, is the workforce development issues. There's already a kind of quite a demand for skilled workforce, and we're working with other parts of government to see what we can do to manage that and help underpin that transition. But I'll finish there, Irene.
Thank you very much, Sean. That's fantastic. So I'm going to invite Neil Gross now, who's the Bell Bay Hydrogen Cluster Manager from the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone. And Leslie, if we can bring up Neil's slides. Neil, your presentation segues very nicely following Sean Terry's presentation about the Tasmanian government's perspective. So over to you.
All right, thank you, Irene. Just one sec while I get myself back into gear again. There we go. Thanks very much, Irene. So what I just wanted to talk about was the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone. Sorry, there we go. And what it is, and then the role it will have in manufacturing hydrogen as we move forward. So what the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone is, or BBAMZ as we call it for fun, we're basically a group of businesses based around Bell Bay which have come together to grow the industry from a realisation that one of the key industries at Bell Bay is the aluminium smelter. It's a very old smelter and quite a small smelter on a global level. And the realisation was that most businesses in Bell Bay were either 100% dependent upon the smelter and also the ferromanganese smelter, or very close to it. And that was not seen to be viable long-term for the Bell Bay area. So over about 5 years, BBAMZ have worked with local businesses to diversify their business models. So now we're at a point where I think the business which is most reliant upon the smelter only relies on about 50 to 60% of its overall turnover from the smelter. Others have found other avenues and other diverse areas to turn a dollar. So coming through that, Bell Bay was seen as one of the natural places for the hydrogen industry to develop. We're lucky in Tasmania, we have some very, very good hydrogen policy, government policy intended to develop the industry, and then I guess it's up to business to take that policy and develop it. So I guess to talk about Bell Bay, really need to understand what is Bell Bay's advantage. So there's 5 key elements needed to make green hydrogen. So the first one is lots of renewable electricity and the real potential to generate more. So for a very, very long time, since the late 1800s, in fact, Tasmania has been very much reliant upon its own capacity to develop renewable energy, and that's come from hydroelectricity. All the developments in power generation in Tasmania have come through the need to generate more power. So when the Bell Bay aluminium smelter was first opened in 1956, there was a whole range of hydroelectric development that took place in the Highlands, which was built to supply power to Bell Bay. Now it's not 1962 anymore and we can't build any more dams, but we do have the real potential to generate a lot more wind energy, and that will be the key to further developing the hydrogen industry, particularly at Bell Bay. The second advantage for Bell Bay is we have plenty of available water. When we're talking about green hydrogen, we're really talking about the electrolysis process, which requires a lot of water and a lot of electricity to split the hydrogen and the oxygen out of that water. So it's estimated we probably need, at full development of the industry at Bell Bay, around 24,000 megalitres a year of water at Bell Bay. But we have that capacity in Tasmania. In fact, that's about 5 days worth of flow off the Central Plateau. So lots of available water. There's just a need to improve the infrastructure to get to Bell Bay. The other advantage with Bell Bay is it's an established industrial zone. So we have a lot of industrial land which is already zoned. There's no issues around developing new industry. In fact, there's a lot of industry already there. In fact, I think there's around 1,800 hectares of zoned industrial land. Now, not all of that will be suitable for industrial development, but a lot of it is. Most of that land is held by Rio, which is the Bell Bay aluminium smelter, but they have the appetite to bring new industry into Bell Bay. In fact, without their support and encouragement, we probably couldn't do what we're doing already. So there's plenty of room for expansion with respect to land to put hydrogen manufacturing facilities on and ammonia facilities. We also have access to a deep water port. And the great thing about the Bell Bay port, and Mark will talk more about that a little bit later, is that it's really a blank canvas for a new industry. So it's not a port which is at maximum capacity, which you'd struggle to squeeze a new industry in. All the players that have come to look at Bell Bay around their plans have all said the port is really a first-class port in terms of suitability for what they want to do. And the fifth key plank is the capacity to further grow the skills base. One of the great things about the advanced manufacturing zone at Bell Bay is that there's a high level of skilled workforce there. Now, 10 years ago in Tasmania, it was always a case of unemployment was the biggest issue. Now, filling employment is the greatest issue. But areas like Bell Bay have the best platform to springboard the skills that we already have and develop the capacity of our local industry to diversify into hydrogen and the ammonia industries. So that, taking that action plan from what Sean was talking about, from that really solid policy into business activity, that's really has been the key advantage for Bell Bay, where we've got really good, solid government policy and business can look at it and make some really strong investment decisions based around that policy. The key part of that, and the key part of what we need to do at Bell Bay, is leveraging the existing capability of Tasmanian businesses to new technologies needed to make hydrogen. So we already have some really strong advanced manufacturing skills at Bell Bay. That's just not in the metals manufacturing, that's in the electrical, the electronic, safety, and a whole range of other areas. For example, one business, CPT Engineering, who were one of those businesses which were 100% reliant upon the aluminium smelter for their business, they've diversified now into a whole range of different avenues. They've opened up a new enterprise in Melbourne. They've got for example, they've got the longest CNC lathe in Australia. So now they're making specialised products which are actually exported out of Australia, particularly into China, which go into new equipment, which is then exported all around the world. So our capability to meet the needs of a new hydrogen industry are very high. In fact, most of the time, our businesses, it's been actually getting them to understand that they're already at a level where they can contribute strongly either to being part of the supply chain for the hydrogen and ammonia industry, or part of the manufacturing side of things, whether that's through fuel cells or small scale electrolyzers or some of the other equipment which can go with a local hydrogen industry. And one of the other things which is really strongly present at Bell Bay is that the enabling technologies for the manufacture of hydrogen, and that's not just in solid equipment, that's in understanding what resources we need at Bell Bay and how we might better use them. For example, BBAMZ are about to commission or start to work on a project around using wastewater as an input for hydrogen. As I mentioned before, it does use a lot of water, but we do also have significant wastewater resources in Tasmania, which we release back into the environment without using them any further. There's a lot of technology which exists, which could be applied into growing the hydrogen sector at Bell Bay. The next steps for Bell Bay, and Sean touched a little bit on these, but I'll talk to them in a little bit more detail, is the main proponents which are coming here to develop. The first one of those is Fortescue, which are talking about a 300 megawatt green ammonia plant. So they're probably the most advanced at this stage. They've sort of been the most aggressive. And I think if Fortescue had their way, they would have been making ammonia yesterday. One of the good things about Fortescue is that they've come to making green ammonia to both use in their iron ore production facilities in the Pilbara and Western Australia, but also they've taken a really strong manufacturing view on this as well, to making their own electrolyzers and trying to sort of vertically integrate their ammonia production. So not just making the ammonia for their own use, but also understanding and controlling some of the manufacturing that will go along with it. They've, I guess it was Sean talked earlier about some of the flashpoints in Tasmania. Fortescue sort of ran the risk at one stage of being one of those where they decided they wanted to negotiate with the government through the media, and they certainly have changed their view around things and then now have a far more nuanced and more acceptable Tasmanian solution for what they want to do. The other project is Origin Energy, which their plan is to commence at about a 400 megawatt green ammonia plant. They're taking a very different view around developing in Tasmania, far more considered approach to that. Now, it's worth saying that all of these projects I'll talk about are not yet at the final investment decision stage. They're not far away, but they've spent a lot of time and effort and working through with the Tasmanian industry as well as government and also the industrial sector at Bell Bay, sort of understanding what our local capacity is and importantly, what our scope is for expansion. The third one is Able Energy, which have a project not so much around ammonia or the export of hydrogen as a gas, but as green methanol. They see methanol as being a very important vector for the moving of hydrogen. They're interested in converting some of Tasmania's green waste into the carbon element of that methanol. It's a really interesting proposal. They've been working on this for quite some time, and it's interesting when you talk with some of the main proponents and also talk with Able about where they see the future as the vector for Tasmania and how it'll move around the planet. Woodside are one of the world's largest energy companies. They've got a 300 megawatt green ammonia proposal, which is slightly outside the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone as an area, but again, quite a mature project and working very strongly forward. And one of the interesting ones which has come out of recent discussions around local uptake of hydrogen is line hydrogen. So a small scale hydrogen electrolyzer, 10 megawatt, and their main focus is not so much on export, but on being the catalyst for using hydrogen in our local transport and other markets. And in many ways for Tasmania, the local uptake will be the really key dividend which comes out of the hydrogen industry. It's one thing to have a really strong export industry, but it's also how we continue that decarbonisation of Tasmania's economy through what we've got the natural advantage to produce in Tasmania. We have the water, we have the energy, have the clean energy. It seems that the next logical step is to use it on our own back doorstep. As Sean also mentioned, there's several more who haven't publicly announced their intentions, but are quite mature in their thoughts. But one of the really interesting ones, which is plans around manufacturing green urea for fertiliser. ammonia is one of the, I think it's the second most traded commodity in the world. It's the key foundation for everything we grow and pretty much everything we blow up as well. So urea is the basis for most nitrogen-based fertiliser. Australia and Tasmania in particular have become very dependent upon European supply fertiliser. In fact, one agricultural person was telling me the other day that 60% of Tasmania's fertiliser up until now came from Russia. So given our potential to be producing green ammonia, it seemed that the logical next step would be to produce that green urea, which would be not only for a local market, but for a broader export market as well. Sean also talked about the hydrogen hub funding, which is really important for us as the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone, because we will be right at the cutting edge of this. You know, I won't go back over what Sean was talking about, but the key thing is that funding to develop the hub at Bell Bay, and I guess it's worth just concentrating on just what that hub means. So one of the key things around Bell Bay is we don't just want one project, we want a number of projects to grow an industry. The key focus of that industry is we need better infrastructure around port, around water, and around power. But it's important that that's common user infrastructure. The last thing we want is to have 5 different proponents of Bell Bay all having their own 5 different water pipes, 5 different network connections, and 5 different access to the port. Because it's such a relatively small area, it makes a lot of industrial sense and economic sense to have the infrastructure that all these industries can use, particularly when it comes to water and power and the port. So this funding is really around developing that common user infrastructure and making sure that it's sustainable on a long-term basis, but also that it allows for the industry to grow. We don't want to get back into the situation where we are at the moment with the aluminium smelter, for example, where there's just one smelter. So if that smelter goes, then it leaves a great big hole. If we've got 4, 5 or 6 different ammonia or hydrogen or methanol producers, it creates a much more diverse and a much more consistent economic base for the Bell Bay region. And Sean also mentioned we're in that unique and very enviable situation where all our utilities are government business enterprises. So, you know, they operate as commercial entities and have their own corporate governance, but they are owned by the taxpayers of Tasmania and controlled by government. The other key thing around that hub will be the market activation and research will also be key features. The market activation is really important in terms of sparking that local use of hydrogen. So whether that's heavy transport using it in road and rail transport, bringing those key businesses to the table who would normally not engage with anything new like this, making sure that research and development which is happening around the globe comes to Tasmania as well. And BBANZ, we've been working closely with CSIRO and AMC about having a research facility at Bell Bay which brings new technology from around the world, and just see how we can commercialise that in a Tasmanian context or use that for manufacturing or other economic activities. So I guess from an industrial zone, I mean, we're a business organisation and we're all about success. I mean, ultimately, we do things because we want to succeed. Business, basically, our forte is that we solve problems that others can't. So what does success actually look like at Bell Bay? And it's important to point out that for the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone, it's not just the making of hydrogen or the ammonia. It's really about developing a really thriving local supply chain that contributes to and benefits from the local use and export of hydrogen. So it's not linear. This whole hydrogen industry at Bell Bay is it's like a tree growing out of the ground. There's branches that'll head off in all different directions. So while its core and its reason for being might be the hydrogen as an end product, that's not the success. The success is developing our aspiration, our young people who want to work in renewable industries. It's developing new industries. It's developing industries which is a bit like the space industry. You know, some of the technological innovations that have come from putting spacecraft into space have flowed on into other areas of industry, and that's where we see the hydrogen industry as well. It will benefit everything else which happens around. And of course, success will be measured by commercial activity. I mean, we understand where the global market is heading in terms of demand for green energy. So for us, that's green ammonia and green methanol and green hydrogen, exporting that. But it's important for us that we take advantage of those opportunities and go, not so much go along for the ride, but be a driver along this. So bring in technology, bring in our problem solving ability. As you know, as Sean also mentioned, you know, we're a tiny little island at the bottom of the world. But one of our bylines from our Tasmanian brand is that we're quietly doing the extraordinary. We do solve problems like no one else does in the world. We do see advantages, and we do things which other places in the world take many, many years to achieve. You know, we're one of the first places in the world to develop hydroelectricity to power towns and energy and other manufacturing like zinc and aluminium. And
Neil, if we can ask you to wrap up.
Yes. Yep, that's my last slide, so that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, and apologies, I wasn't sure. Thank you so much, Neil. Very good lead on to Mark Cooper, who's the Manager of Operations at Bell Bay's Port at Tassports. Mark, thank you so much for joining this webinar today. We're all very interested to hear you talk about, you know, Tassports' ambition to move to net zero and all the work that you're going to do to support all these big energy developments in Tasmania. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. And Leslie's going to pop up some, so we might jump to the next slide, Leslie. And I do have a timer on, Irene, so it'll give me a 2-minute warning. So look, a couple of slides we'll be able to jump past because they've been mentioned previously. But first of all, I just need to acknowledge that what we're trying to do at Tassports is not, we're not doing it on our own. We are supported by some wonderful organisations. We've got RecFit there, we've got the Blue Economy CRC course, we've got the Maritime College up the road, and the Australian Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone all supporting us in our endeavours. Our primary focus is in the export of product. That's what we're there for. But also the work we're doing is also very much driven towards supporting decarbonisation and supporting our renewable energy futures and dreams. So for us, it is a priority, decarbonisation, and we're committed to doing our part both internally and externally. And externally, it's around supporting the initiatives that let us do this, which is particularly the common user infrastructure, making sure that everyone's got the ability to export their product through the port and out to their markets, and certainly doing everything we can to facilitate that. That includes not just through exporting of hydrogen-based products, but also the enabling technologies, particularly things like importing and supporting wind farms, which will provide the electricity, which will help us to generate the hydrogen to export. And we'll jump into more of that just in a minute. We'll jump to the next slide if we could. Thank you. Now, Sean's already mentioned our Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan, so thank you. I'll be able to jump past that one as well. This is some images that I did steal from Irina. So for us, we are focused on green hydrogen export. And over on the right there, I've just flagged 2 things, the transport mode being shipping and end users. The reason I've done that is, as our European colleagues raised earlier, we do believe that one of the transition modes that will lead to greater uptake in the world is through shipping converting to renewable fuels, and that's definitely being supported by the IMO, particularly with their CO2 reduction targets. And I'll talk more about that shortly, but Tassports is looking at ways that we can look at our own fleet and what we can do at the moment to make sure that they're playing their part. And certainly with our exports, we do have a lot of it going into various industries around the world, including shipping, and bunkering is another one we want to talk about. But we'll jump to the next slide there if we can, please. Another stolen image. So this one's about 1.5 years old, and I've got this one here because I have had people suggest that the hydrogen economy is not real, and I'll flag this because it is happening around the world. There is a lot of projects announced, and since this image was taken, I believe there's probably another 150 on top of that one there. So we'll jump to the next one. So Bell Bay. We're pretty keen on the hydrogen hubs because it does actually, as I've got there, it does let us all work together towards creating something that's bigger than the individual components. And for Bell Bay, that's really, really critical. We have been very much focused on a couple of industries, the smelters and a couple of other little industries there. So the BB aims is doing a lot there. But for Tassports' part, and that image there, by the way, shows our berth 4, which is where we're going to have our export facility. And we're currently working through what this is going to entail to get a common user access down to that berth. And that includes, we understand the port infrastructure we need already, we understand the shipping requirements, and we're working on how we're going to get those volumes of ships in and out and the sizes that we need, and also safety systems. One of the things we do have in our favour is our local community. Georgetown is some way away. So the area is quite conducive to exporting of ammonia and hydrogen-based products. But if we jump to the next slide, this is the general layout of the port, and the two little white boxes are areas that have since been taken up since I put this image together. But if you jump to the next slide, we'll show you what we're planning there at the moment. Should be one more slide there, Leslie. Yep, sit there. Oh, go back one. That's it. Yep. So currently the spot mark number 1 is just one of the many plots of land. That's about 22 hectares that one of the hydrogen production companies has optioned from Tassports. Probably of more interest is number 2 there is where we are currently planning as an ideal site for our common manifolds to allow multiple people to get their product into a pipeline that'll take it down to number 3 there, which is our berth, number 4. And it's 11.7 metres alongside, so it is a nice deep water port. All right, we'll jump to the next one. But as Neil said, there's multiple proponents looking to export product from the port. So within this area, I think we're talking to about 4 different people, and I've already flagged there Fortescue, Woodside, Origin, and others. I didn't want to exclude the other smaller producers. We've talked about Able Energy with their methanol, but we're also talking to people around producing dimethyl ether and other products as well. And the other opportunity there is for us to be exporting hydrogen-based products as fuels and potentially being an exporter to the world of those products. On Friday last week, I just did a bit of a check on the wind farms that we knew that were coming up, or that people have said, and I've counted there about 5.5 gigawatts of wind development coming up in the future. And Bell Bay does play an absolute significant part in being able to get those components in and staged before they go out to the offshore farms and onshore farms. And the last one we did was Cattle Hill. So another project that's coming up, for those that may not be aware, there's a number of offshore oil platforms that are coming up to be decommissioned. And I think I've listed there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are coming up. And we think that's a supporting factor for our hydrogen or our decarbonisation, what's the word I'm looking for? Dreams, or not dreams, but agenda. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. I'm trying to be as quick as I can, Irene, so I'm down to 2 minutes 30. We understand there's a bit of work that we need to do on our port infrastructure, and that includes manifolds and pipes, conduits, and all our associated transmission infrastructure. We do have a wharf there. It's a 54.5 metre long wharf. We do understand that we need to lengthen that and do some other work there, including changing our control rooms and putting in new loading infrastructure and control systems. And we are reasonably well progressed with that at the moment. We'll move to the next slide. Actually, we'll jump to the next slide because this has already been covered. All right. I know Mark mentioned earlier around the IMO and using shipping as a method of, I guess, wider acceptance of renewables as fuel. But I had someone say to me the other day that, why are we so keen on hydrogen and ammonia? And I just had a look at my EndNote library. And I just pulled up, six random papers that talk about how shipping is going to be one of those transition fuels. And we're very keen because other than exporting for other ports to use, we also see it as one of those fuels that will drive the decarbonisation of our shipping fleets around the world. And we're very keen with that. And so one of the things we are looking at also is how that we can take advantage of this as being a major exporter of replacement fuels for our current diesels and heavy fuel oils. We'll jump to the next one. Oh, go back one. Yep, that one there. Good. So a couple of things there is 38 seconds left. Tassports does have a vision for growth, and to do that, we believe we need to do it through exports, which is primarily what we're there for. And the big opportunity there, of course, is hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels. And we do have a clear plan for how we're going to achieve it. We have our capability to deliver, and that includes putting human resources into appropriate roles to make this happen. And as I keep saying to all those customers that come and visit us, we are ready to execute agreements and to make it happen. And with the Hydrogen Hub funding recently, we're one step closer to having that in place. And 0 seconds, how's that, Irene?
Mark, that was wonderful. Thank you very much, and extremely interesting, and great to see that Tassports is very open to the collaborations and working with different technology developers, but also the supply chain to help enable you to transition to net zero. So I think it's fantastic. I'm going to go over now to Evan Gray, who's a program leader in the Blue Economy CRC. He leads our offshore renewable energy systems program, and together with Evan and our industry partners and the Tasmanian government and also Hydro Tasmania and BOC and others, we've been developing a hydrogen microgrid that will be commercially operating later this year. And I'd like to welcome Evan to talk to us about the CRC's work and how we can help support industry to achieve what they want. So I'm going to pass over to Evan. Thanks.
Thanks, Irene. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I've got my camera off. I'm grappling with a rather poor internet connection, so I hope you'll be able to hear me okay. Leslie, would you go to the next slide, please? So very briefly, I'm going to dive down to the project level and talk about how the Blue Economy CRC is going to try to promote the use of hydrogen offshore. I lead Research Program 3 in the red box there. And our focus is on delivering renewable energy systems offshore. And when you look into that, hydrogen has a very important part to play. And we find ourselves focusing on microgrids. So that's the reason for that very specific topic of this talk. Next slide, please, Leslie. So this is a kind of a summary of the things we're interested in. And it's conveniently based on the idea of a microgrid where you have sources of electricity control, in our case, because it's a hydrogen microgrid, hydrogen production, and then storage and the eventual use of that in numerous end uses. We would like those to include aquaculture, but there are also other aspects, and we do have a strong interest in hydrogen-powered vessels. Next slide, please, Leslie. These are projects that have been completed. The top row there, you can see the kind of focus that we have. It's very much on what's happening offshore. The projects on the top line were quite small, but they were designed to inform our research agenda over the ensuing years, and they were all quite successful. And then out of that, some projects arose that are now in progress. These are much larger research projects, one on microgrids, some on wave energy, and so on. And there's a link there where you can look at the BECRC website to get much more information about these. I shan't bother with talking about them any further because the information is there. Next slide, please, Leslie. Okay, so this is now getting a bit more current. We have in Research Program 3, we have some projects under development, and this now begins to show the necessary breadth of interest that we need to have. There's one about ameliorating risk and operating offshore renewable energy systems. The second one, with the picture at the right pertaining to that, I shall talk about in more detail in a minute, but it's actually about building microgrids. And there is a complementary project in development dealing with system level modeling for offshore power systems, because the modeling goes with the building of the energy system to try and understand, or to make sure that we understand how the thing works and to be able to optimize its operation and control. Next slide, please, Leslie. This is something that spreads right across the CRC. In other research programs, we have a project already well in progress called More Power, which is the image at the right, in which the roughly circular motion of a moored vessel is captured to produce electricity. That's a project we're really pleased with, happening under Research Program 1. Also under Research Program 1 is the project on looking into the viability of hydrogen powering of vessels in Australia and New Zealand. And the last one there in Research Program 5 is really looking at the non-technical issues, those of regulation and social license and governing and so on, that go hand in hand with developing projects like this, and it did in developing industries like this. Next slide, please, Leslie. So to get to the hydrogen microgrid demonstration project itself, we are actually building what's shown on the right there in Hobart. So this is a DC microgrid. You've already heard that the Marinus link between Tasmania and Victoria is DC, and this is a trend that's occurring worldwide, and we're hoping that we're keeping ahead of the trend, as it were, by concentrating on DC power systems. So this microgrid will be built in Hobart around a 700 kilowatt ITM power electrolyzer. The offtake from that will be to support the fuel cell bus project that's already been mentioned. And we will have a modest amount of real renewable input from PV, and we will have also there a pure hydrogen turbine in the system and a programmable load, and also not shown there, a programmable power supply so that we can emulate, say, wind or wave generation. And the goal of this system is, the goals are twofold. One is commercial offtake. That's a fully commercial operation, but it's also going to support quite a lot of research projects. Next slide, please, Leslie. Leslie, can you hear me okay? Okay. Have you skipped one there? No, that's okay, thank you. So I won't dwell on this. This is the electrolyzer. Most of you will be familiar with what they look like. It's containerized, and it's one of the larger ones in Australia. It will be one of the larger ones in Australia when it arrives later this year, producing more than 1/4 of a tonne per day of hydrogen. Next slide, please, Leslie. So the goals of this project, aside from the commercial goal of hydrogen offtake to support buses, are, of course, a demonstration which has its own value in outreach. When you show people the real system, the real technology, it helps them to understand it. It helps them to become advocates for it. We will be running research projects which will be based around emulating real-world scenarios of interest to the blue economy, CRC and Tasmania and Australia more generally. There will, of course, be modelling, techno-economic analysis going on, but then there are these other concomitants, the training that it will provide to both research and industry personnel. It will be a means by which CRC partners engage with each other. That's happening already. And very importantly, it'll be a scaffold for other projects across the entire blue economy CRC and perhaps outside, in other aspects that are less technical than the straight provision of hydrogen. Next slide, please, Leslie. The next phase of this will begin in about 2025 when we want to take this microgrid offshore. And as you can see, it's a kind of big brother or big sister to the one we're building in Hobart, where we hope to have the electrolyzer DC powered. There should be some DC loads. We hope to be providing electric power for desalination and lights and general loads in association with aquaculture. We hope to be exporting hydrogen, and importantly, we do also hope to be supporting vessels to be refueled at sea at a platform. Next slide, please, Leslie. So we hope to, as I say, integrate this system with aquaculture so that we displace diesel. Diesel generators are the only source of electric power in most aquaculture farms, especially those offshore. And we can produce oxygen, of course, which is required for fish farming at certain times of year. And so we hope to improve the sustainability of aquaculture, generally speaking, through decarbonising the energy associated with it and required by it. Next slide, please, Leslie. This island is not off Tasmania, I have to say. It looks much more like a reef island off Queensland. However, you get the idea. It's a remote system. Another such system would be in Antarctica. Such remote communities need energy security. There are obvious reasons why energy security is enormously important. They get their power from diesel at the minute. That has to stop. They need fresh water. And so the whole topic of sustainable generation of energy, possibly as electricity, as hydrogen, as heat, and in the form of water is tremendously important. Next slide, please, Leslie. Timeline for our project, it's well underway. COVID has delayed the delivery of the electrolyzer until about October at the latest. We do hope that it will be here earlier than that. I'm very pleased to be able to say that the capstone pure hydrogen microturbine was actually commissioned on 100% hydrogen last week in Melbourne. Very low NOx emissions, way below the Australian standard, so that's extremely pleasing. So by about October, we expect our microgrid in Hobart to be in the commissioning phase, and early in 2023, we expect to be able to generate hydrogen for offtake, not just the bus project, but there will be hydrogen left over for other off-takers and of course for research purposes as well. Next slide, please, Leslie. Some nuts and bolts associated with this. There are, of course, in common with all such projects, a list of permissions that are needed. So the site itself, which is a commercial site operated by BOC, the gas supplier and retailer in Australia. Electricity permissions, environmental protection permissions, the need for water supply, all of those things, of course, are what we tend to call red tape, but necessary to be got through, and they are being got through in fairly timely fashion. We hope that the electrolyzer will turn up before October. Its final acceptance testing is due to happen in June this year. So we're very excited about the prospect of actually having our electrolyzer in Tasmania as the heart of our microgrid, and the rest of the microgrid is being developed in parallel with that. So we'll be ready to go when the electrolyzer arrives. Next slide, please, Leslie, which I believe is the final one. Thanks for your attention and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Evan. That takes us to the end of what I think have been some really interesting presentations, both by Flanders and Tasmania. So I might ask our presenters to put their videos on, and I'd like to introduce a couple more panelists that I have for the Q&A. And so I'm going to just introduce, if I can, two others that are on the screen, and I'll just get you to wave if you can. Luca Bottalo, who's the Director of Flanders Investment and Trade. He's based over in Melbourne. And just so you understand, Flanders Investment and Trade was established under the government of Flanders in Belgium. And then also Kim De Meyer, from Flanders Investment and Trade, who's their Science and Technological Counsellor, who's based in Singapore. I'm sorry, Kim. It's dinner time, I think, in Tasmania. That's probably what it is. And I'd like to just introduce Kim as well. He's going to actually help with facilitating some of the Q&A today. I'm going to start with just a couple of questions in the context of those that I can see that have been presented online. And I think this is really relevant both to the Flemish side and also the Tasmanian side. So both Flanders and Tasmania are establishing hydrogen policies for the development, basically for the production and also export of hydrogen. And I think probably one of the big questions that comes to mind for many people, and I can see this has been asked by a couple of people who are part of, say, DMV, for instance, who deal with a lot of the regulations in the marine industry, is when it comes to the marine-based applications, so the use of hydrogen and other fuels in vessels, or for export, transport through bunkering and shipping of the hydrogen and any other co-products, is there a regulatory framework already established to support this? And so I might start over with the Flemish side. Is there anyone who might be prepared to answer the question?
Sure that this document will be...
Well, I can try to do that quite briefly, Irene, if you want to.
you.
But yes, there is a regulatory framework. And it's almost a presentation on its own, but within the EU, they have developed several things. There is Fuel EU Maritime is one of the things, the regulatory frameworks under, let's say, the 54-55, that in steps has to lead to 75% by 2050 in greenhouse gas limitations for fuels, and it starts as of from 2025 onwards. There is also the Fuel EU Maritime initiative that I explained just now, and then you have the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation coming up, on which there is still some discussion at the moment, but that is there to develop and deploy innovative low-carbon technologies in vehicles, vessels, and fuels and energy, and create economic value for the transport systems, and to help the EU companies and EU industries to achieve world leadership in that. So the regulatory framework is in place or being developed at the moment. So I see no real barriers at the moment. As I said, the Green Deal is a very ambitious project. It's like man to the moon. Huh? It's and so either you're in or you're out. And I have often, without any mercy, sabled down criticism on the Green Deal. I mean, if you put an ambitious project on, you have to go full out and say we go flat out. And of course, it started before the war, Russia and Ukraine started. Now it's almost, well, there's no alternative anymore. We have to go and travel down that path.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I think in the EU, that's quite clear. Is there anyone who might be prepared to talk about the regulations for marine, for hydrogen in ships in Australia? And if not, I can help.
So I can't talk about marine specifically, but there's a couple of bits of work underway, both at the national and the state level through National Energy Ministers. They've commissioned a review of all the regulatory arrangements to make sure hydrogen, there's no barriers to introducing hydrogen. That's in a whole range of sectors, whether I presume marine would be captured by that, but that would be safety, gas blending, all the potential environment, and also in Tasmania, we're doing our own state-based review of the regulatory arrangements to make sure there are no barriers to introducing hydrogen. I think we've got something like, we've identified 80 pieces of legislation that we're going to have to review, and where possible, and if required, make sure they're fit for purpose. So there's a body of work underway right across the whole regulatory arrangements around hydrogen.
Thank you, Sean. I might just also add that in the Blue Economy CRC, we've started to look at, powering of hydrogen vessels. And one of the projects that we've been working towards putting together, which Flanders Investment and Trade, Tassports are involved in, BMT, who's one of the engineering companies worldwide, global engineering companies, and some of our research partners have started to put together around hydrogen vessels. And some of the key things that at least that project will look at through scoping is some of those policies that are in place for hydrogen vessels. And in particular, we've established a relationship through our work to be able to test some of those regulations with both DMV, who's a partner in the CRC, and also with ANSA, who's the Australian regulator, so the Australian Marine Safety Authority. So that will be, I think, an interesting part of our research that we hope can help inform some of the regulatory frameworks in Australia as well. I'm going to go over to a couple of questions that are now really, I think, targeted to the Flemish group that actually presented earlier. And I'm just going to pass over a couple of questions to you. So one of the questions that has been asked is, can you outline how the equipment is being funded? So I assume that WaterStuffNet and potentially the Blue Cluster probably in a really good space to talk about your funding models with your collaborations as well, and how that works with all of your various partners.
Yes, I can give a short answer. We have quite a lot of those funding programs. As Mark already mentioned, we are quite ambitious here. So if you want to go to the moon, you also need some money for that. And there is quite a lot of European money and also some Belgian money foreseen. So it would be too, it would be too broad to explain all the different funding programs. But let's say that we have quite a lot of them that fund, let's say 50% of the investment that you need. There are quite a lot of different programs established here in Belgium, Europe, to fund these equipment.
And does that funding apply to projects outside of the EU for any of the companies that are based in Belgium? Would that apply to projects outside of the EU, potentially with Tasmanians?
Maybe Mark, I don't know about this. You can answer better.
No, Tom, thank you. I mean, you summed it up quite nicely. I mean, the EU funding for a Tasmanian company would be quite difficult, I think. But a Tasmanian company in cooperation with a European company doing a project, that's a different ballgame. I don't want to make too much of a joke out of it, but most companies nowadays start to employ people called subsidiologists. I mean, it has become so complicated that I have people here also in the cluster. You'll meet them, Irene, when you are over here. I mean, it's a maze. It's terrible. The money is there, as Tom said. There's plenty of money available, but how to access it has its own rules, and it has become an arcane science.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks very much, Tom. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a broader question to everybody as well that's on this call from both the Flemish side and the Tasmanian side. You know, with such big hydrogen production and export targets, do you foresee any challenges associated with bringing the community along with this energy transition vision? And I might actually pass this over to the Flemish side first, in terms of the work that you've done with the community. You know, what has been some of those discussions, and how does you know, people in Belgium view this big transition, energy transition?
So shall I have a go at it again, Irene? I mean, the energy transition is, people in Belgium know that we will never be energy independent as a country, as Gilles and Tom outlined. But it doesn't mean people are not in favor of the big energy transition. The only worry people have is when we are not used as a country, and the whole of Europe is not used as a country, unlike the United States, that you have rolling blackouts or whatever. People are used to, when you come home, you flip the switch and there's electricity and the light goes on. And any politician saying to the population something different, that's political suicide. But reality is hitting us hard now. I mean, electricity prices have tripled over the past few months. I mean, people are having difficulties in paying their bills. Huh? So this is a transition. There were lofty principles at the onset of saying we want to be, Europe wants to be completely greenhouse gas neutral. But now reality has actually caught on with us and is overtaking us. And now politicians have to make some hard decisions. We were going to close down nuclear power plants in Belgium, but now the only option that we have now is to prolong their lifespan and keep 2 of them open, because otherwise the lights will go out.
So maybe I'll throw it over to Jill as well. Do you want to add anything further?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for your explanation, and I just want to complement your message. Indeed, today we see that people, their interest in green but also affordable energy has risen enormously. We've seen that the past years protests in the street, and we've seen that our politicians are also listening to them. And of course, it's work in progress. It's a developing economy, but we've seen the strategies that are coming forth, and we've seen as well. Mark posted the link towards the Hydrogen Import Coalition in the chat or in the Q&A I've seen. So we've, as a coalition of industries, we've also proposed certain measures, certain advices, and we've seen them now, as Tom presented, also being included in the strategy of the government in a way forward for our energy transition. And we see that for the society, but also for the representatives, for our government, this becomes more and more of importance.
Thank you. I'm going to maybe pass it over to the Tasmanian side as well. Neil, the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone has some priorities around social acceptability of hydrogen, in particular, used in the domestic economy and market. Tell us a little bit about some of what you're doing to help improve some of people's understanding of hydrogen and its applications, and any social license issues that you've heard from the community.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time talking to community groups, to business groups, to all sorts of people. It's actually a really simple explanation, because you just explain what problem we're seeking to solve, which is decarbonising, and there's pressure on decarbonising transfer from fuel. So yeah, it's very simple. Break it down into its component parts, explain what the problem is we're seeking to solve and the pathway to doing that. One of the interesting things about Tasmania, you don't have to move very far between communities to find polar opposites in terms of opinions. You know, in Georgetown around hydrogen, it's why haven't you done it yet? 15 kilometres down the road at Hillwood, it's where are all these people going to live? Directly across the river in the Tamar, it's how ugly is it going to be? We still bear the legacy of about 10 years ago, the pulp mill project for Tasmania, when there was a very large scale, significant pulp mill development for the Tamar Valley, which absolutely polarised the community. We have to get our processes right about how we communicate and learn from those mistakes that were made back then. But typically, talking to community groups and all sorts of people, business groups, skeptics, proponents, all sorts of people, there's no real opposition to it, as in this is a bad thing. It's just, okay, is it going to happen? Because there's always the skepticism in Tasmania about whether something will actually happen or not. As I explained to people, the juggernaut is real, and it's how we manage the consequences of success from a community point of view. That's the challenge.
Thanks very much, Neil. I might just leave some closing words for Sean Terry, the Executive Director of RECFI. Would you like to leave some closing words about the opportunities with the MOU, and then I'll thank everyone and close the webinar?
Sure. The MOU with Flanders, absolutely. Like, you know, we see some fantastic synergies, with what Tasmania is trying to do and what Belgium's trying to do. So, it's a, you know, it's kind of frontier stuff for Tasmania, developing these international partnerships, but it's certainly an exciting time. And you know, and we really want to kind of build on the work that's happened, build those long-term relationships. But yeah, look, a lot of work to be done, but it's a few challenges. But you know, we started this journey together, and hopefully we'll see it through to the end.
Thank you. And Luca Bottalo from Flanders Investment and Trade, some closing words from your side about the opportunities with this MOU and looking forward.
First of all, thank you, and to all the speakers, because it was a very informative webinar with a lot of information. So from our side, of course, we are here to facilitate the contact, the connection, the bilateral investment, bilateral trade. So the MOU provides the right framework. It's just a start, because then we'll start talking also about offshore wind. And hopefully some of the Tasmanian entities will be able to visit Flanders during the year. So we'll be able also to show some of the capabilities that are in Flanders.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the speakers, all the presentations, all the effort that's gone into today's webinar, and appreciate everyone who's turned out to listen to the webinar. The recording of the webinar will be available from the Blue Economy CRC's website, and it will be available indefinitely for you to go back and review the presentations that were given both by the Flemish and the Tasmanian side. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you so much for your questions. And I look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.